It's Football Focus in 10 minutes here on BBC One after the news with Darren Jordan.
Good afternoon. The freed hostage, Norman Kember, is due to arrive back in Britain shortly. Friends and family are at Heathrow Airport to welcome him back after 4 months in captivity in Iraq. But there is continuing controversy about whether the 74-year-old peace activist has given adequate thanks to soldiers who freed him. Well, Daniel Bircher is at Heathrow Airport now. Daniel.
Darren, within the next half hour or so, we're expecting a commercial flight from Kuwait to draw up at one of the stands just behind me here. On board, Norman Kember, held captive for so long, free at last, and he is expected to give a statement to the media here at the airport. Pat Kember leaving the family home in northwest London this morning on her way to the airport for a reunion with her husband that she and many others must have feared may never happen. But after 4 months in captivity, Norman Kember is almost back home, apparently unharmed and in good spirits after his ordeal. The next challenge is to readjust to a life of normality, if such a thing is possible after what he's been through. Friends believe he will need a great deal of support.
It'll be very difficult, but he's a solid, reliable person, a man of faith. I think he'll need medical help, but I think that in a month or two he will come down to earth.
And there are still many questions about what happened to Norman Kember and the men held with him. Who were the captors? How did intelligence lead to the release of the hostages in an operation involving the SAS, US, Canadian and Iraqi forces? And following comments from the Chief of Defence Staff suggesting that Norman Kember had not publicly thanked the troops who rescued him, this response from the organisation with which he travelled to Iraq.
Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and the fact that Norman has not been able to make a public statement in full yet should not be taken as an indication that he's not grateful. And in fact, talking to his friends today, they're quite clear that when Norman comes back, he will express his gratitude very clearly.
Mr. Kember is expected to make a statement on his return. His family have then asked to be given some quality time to be together in peace. Now, we don't know exactly what will be in this statement from Norman Kember about his experiences, and in particular whether there will be reference to or thanks for the troops that rescued him and the 2 Canadians held with him.
Thank you. Police investigating the £53 million robbery from the Securitas depot in Kent have made more arrests. Detectives are questioning 3 women in connection with the raid last month. They were held in London on suspicion of money laundering and handling stolen property. Labour has called on the Conservatives to reveal the names of all those who loaned them money in the run-up to the last general election. The Environment Secretary, Margaret Beckett, has written to the Tory leader, David Cameron, urging him to reconsider his refusal to do so. Thousands of people have taken to the streets of Minsk, the capital of Belarus, in protest at the re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko. Opposition parties who have organised the rally believe last weekend's election, which secured a 3rd term for Mr. Lukashenko, was rigged. There have been minor clashes between protesters and riot police this morning. Russia has denied claims that it passed on US military intelligence to Saddam Hussein in the run-up to the war in Iraq. The claims are made in a new report issued by the Pentagon, as Nick Charles reports.
Even as the bombs rained down on Baghdad 3 years ago, Russians were supplying Iraq with information on America's war plan, according to Iraqi documents revealed in a new Pentagon report. The document said Russia had sources within the main US headquarters that was running the war. President Bush did his best to win Vladimir Putin round to backing the conflict. He failed. So will this new twist dent US-Russian relations, which are hardly at their best right now anyway? Moscow says these new allegations are false. And as the Americans pressed home their attack, what impact would such information have had? Some of it was plain wrong and probably helped the Americans. It was Saddam Hussein himself who was the biggest single factor in his own defeat, the Pentagon says. He completely underestimated the American threat to his hold on power. Nick Childs, BBC News.
At the Commonwealth Games, the medal hopes of England's women's relay team have been dashed after they were disqualified. They'd won gold in the 4x400 metres, but were then stripped of their medals for crossing lanes. With that and all the other action from Melbourne, here's James Monroe.
England's relay teams have suffered here in Melbourne, and none more so than the women's 4x400, who thought they'd won gold, only to be disqualified. While they were celebrating, Australia were complaining that an English athlete had switched lanes, and their protest was upheld. Earlier, it looked like Philip Sadowu had put a spring back into England's step in the triple jump.
Will we see it now?
His first attempt was good enough for gold. And across the track, Nick Neeland also led the javelin from the start. He was the only athlete to throw over 80 metres. But Britain's best success came in the boxing ring, where lightweight Frankie Gavin was one of 5 gold medalists for England. Ken Anderson won the light heavyweight division to make it 11 golds for Scotland in these games so far. James Munro, BBC News, Melbourne.
And Tony Blair has arrived in Melbourne this morning to watch the closing stages of the Commonwealth Games. Mr Blair and his wife Cherie were met by the Australian Prime Minister John Howard. They'll attend the Games closing ceremony tomorrow. And over on BBC News 24 now, there's live coverage from Heathrow Airport, where the British hostage Norman Kember is expected to land in the next half hour. That's it. I'll be back with more from the newsroom at 5:20 here on BBC One. Bye for now.
Hello there. Standing on the touchline should be a much more pleasurable experience across most sports fields through the UK during this weekend. Spring is here at last. We've got milder conditions spreading right in from the southwest. It's also quite a bit wetter in many places as well, but that's good news, of course, for those parched areas across southern England. You can see the banks of clouds spreading in from the Atlantic, bringing us the milder air, but also bringing us some rain. And the mild air hasn't quite reached the north of Scotland yet, where it's going to stay cold and wet and pretty windy too across the Northern Isles through the rest of today. But once we get down to the central lowlands and from here southwards, the mild air is very much in evidence with those southwesterly winds pushing in. A lovely afternoon across much of eastern England with plenty more sunshine to come, and those temperatures really are responding, up around 14, possibly 15 degrees. Head further south and west though, and we start to pick up the cloud again. It'll be thickening through the afternoon and bringing some heavy rain in across much of southwest England and South Wales, and with those freshening winds gusting eventually up to around 40, 50 miles an hour around some of the coasts and hills of the southwest by the end of the day. We'll find some of that rain eventually moving into Northern Ireland, but still some brightness to come over the next hour or two before that finally arrives. But overnight tonight, that rain's going to work its way northwards across all areas, so we'll all see a spell of probably 2 or 3 hours of fairly steady rain. That mild air still very much in evidence, though, with temperatures holding around 10 degrees in many places through the course of the night. Probably a grey start, though, across many parts of Wales tomorrow, perhaps some brightness for the north, and a wet start for Northern Ireland and the southwest of Scotland. Another belt of rain running in from the southwest, but by tomorrow we should have found that milder air beginning to move in across northern Scotland, so a very different feel to the day here, although it will take some time for that rain to clear from Shetland. But once again, eastern parts of England standing the best chance of getting some sunny spells, particularly I think through the morning time. But again, as we head further south and west, we start to pick up that cloud. And I think tomorrow the rain's going to move in rather more quickly, so pretty misty around many of these coasts in the southwest, and that rain lurking with intent even at 10 o'clock in the morning off the south coast of Devon and Cornwall. And that rain will start moving steadily northwards through the day, so by the afternoon a good part of England and Wales starting to turn rather wet, I think. Some fairly brisk winds coming in as well, and that rain slow to clear from northern Scotland. But look at those temperatures, 16 degrees looks possible in those brighter spells ahead of the rain band over eastern England. Looks like the same theme continues into the start of next week. There'll be a few bright spells. It will stay very mild. There'll be rain at times for most as well. You can have a look at the latest 5-day forecast on the website, but in the meantime, well, enjoy this mild weekend.